So thank you, George, for that introduction. And so George says, my name is Nancy Brusgaard. I work at Leiden University as a PhD candidate. And my PhD research focuses on the rock art of the Black Desert in Jordan, which I'll give you a little bit of background on in a minute. And today I want to be talking a little bit about what is a small part of my research, part of the larger research, which is the micro-landscapes in the rock art. So not so much the rock art and the context around it, but really on a very small scale. And I'll be using a case study of some really fascinating hunting scenes that we have. But just to touch on what George says, so I think all of you who are familiar with rock art research will know that there has been this shift in the research in recent years. From this emphasis on the art, on the image, to more the material, understanding that it is about the material as much as it is about the image, and that we can't separate the two. And at the same time, understanding that this canvas, as George called it as well, it's not just a neutral thing, it's not a passive backdrop in any way, but it's really much part of the process of image creation. And I couldn't fit all of Nicole Bovin's quote on here, but she says actually that it's maybe even more important than the image itself eventually. And George, because I know you love street art, this is a street artist I really like, and obviously I love this one because of the camels. So I think this is a really nice illustration of the use of your canvas, as it were. And this is one of the things I've been looking at as well, about this idea of micro-landscapes in the rock art and how they might be creating them as well. But quickly, to give a bit of background, the Black Desert, where is it? This is a map of Jordan, and the Black Desert is locally known as the Hara, and it stretches down from southern Syria into northern Saudi Arabia. And I'm part of a large project that's working on archaeology, epigraphy, and rock art. And we're working in this research area here, Jebel Qurma. And this is what the landscape looks like. This is the area that we work in. Large basalt rocks, large outcrops, isolated boulders, with the petroglyphs engraved into them. And they're not painted, it's just the patina of the basalt over the years that weathers to a really nice color. And there's one of the camels, one of the many camels. And we don't just have rock art, we have inscriptions as well, texts which are written in what is known as Safietic. And they are, most of the time they are names, but they also sometimes refer to the rock art, such as in this case, they're saying, by this guy are the animals. And they also mention aspects of daily life, such as pasturing camels or migration. And they give us a rough relative date for the rock art because of their mentioning of Nabateans and Romans. But there are a lot of problems around this date. This is a satellite image of the research area of Jebel Qurma, just to give you an idea. All these white dots and the red dots here are all sites, not just rock art, but also archaeology. This is one of them. You've got a huge cairn, and around 200 boulders full of rock art and inscriptions. There's one of the examples. Another camel, because we've got lots of them. And the rock art is figurative in nature. There are some geometric figures, but in general, about 3/4 of all the figures are zoomorphic. Anthropomorphs make up a very small portion, and dromedary camels make up a third. So they are a big part of the corpus that I have. But we also have a lot of wild animals, and especially depicted in hunting scenes, which I'll tell you about. So the scenes I've defined as interactions between figures, between two or more figures. More than 50% of the scenes that we have are of hunting. So they're a very dominant theme in the rock art, and that's interesting because they're hardly mentioned in the inscriptions. The inscriptions talk about pasturing, about camels, about migration. They don't talk about wild animals or about hunting. The rock art does. And this is a really nice example here where you've got the archers on the side, something which either gazelle or ibex maybe, and Paul, you've got the dogs here. That's it for you. And if we start to think about this idea of looking at the rock art and the canvas that we have, what we see is that in the Jebel Qurma area, the rock art is portrayed on large outcrops, but also small isolated boulders, and in general, especially the scenes, they take up the entire boulder. So they really make use of the space that they're using. but they're generally only depicted on one side. Except for the only exception are those sort of very large boulders, which sometimes have an accumulation of images on several sides. But those are the exception. So the hunting scenes that I want to talk a bit about are very fascinating because they are an exception to this, because they depict the scene across multiple panels. So I'll show you a really nice image here. Here we have we have these oryx here. There are some archers down here, another dog, and they're all depicted on what you could maybe call the main panel. You've got most of the figures, and there's an inscription up here that's been effaced, and it's the one that when you approach the boulder, it attracts your eye. But then you also have this side panel here where there's just this one little figure, and when you come across this once in the field, you think that's interesting, and then twice, and then 3 times, 4 times, and then you realize there's something going on. And the fascinating thing is there are 8 of these, but possibly more, because some of them are a bit ambiguous. And in all of the cases, it's always the hunter which is on the side panel. It's never one of the prey, it's always the hunter. And in 7 instances, it's an archer, and then 1, it's a dog. So that's something that's very noticeable as well. I'll just give you another nice example here. So here we have the same thing going on. So you have this giant lion, and then this guy here who's, I don't know what he's doing, holding his tail, I don't know. Maybe that's how you catch a lion. But luckily he has backup, because on the side panel, sort of seeming to be hidden from over there, is an archer who's got who's facing the lion from his back, so ready to support his friend somehow. And what we see is that in all of these cases, the style, the patina, sometimes the technique used as well, is the same for this little hunter as it is for the rest of the scene. So they really do seem to belong together. And sometimes we also get a cartouche, like a thin incised line that goes around the entire scene, again, really indicating this is part of the same assemblage. But what is interesting about them as well is that it seems like there are different degrees of how visible or invisible these hunters are. So in general, they seem to be using the natural divisions in the rock. These you see the boulder is divided here by an angle. There are 2 panels because of that, and by using these natural divisions, by using the surface as it is, you create this sort of almost a narrative in the scene, and you get the hidden hunter. But they do vary a little bit. So you've got this one here, for example, where if you were to approach the boulder, both of them are very noticeable right away. You see the wild ass, and you see the archer here who is hunting him, and they're both very visible. But I have another one. I hope this video works. Let's see. So this is one where it took a long time to find the archer, because it wasn't until I turned the rock over that I found him. And actually this rock was completely lying on the ground, but to make the model I had to sort of place it on another one. But you see here, you've got this archer here. Sorry, I wasn't doing a very good job of turning around. You see here you've got the archer, and he's like curving from one panel or one side of the panel to the other, and you see he's going over the next one. And the interesting thing is that in almost all of these cases, the bow and arrow that the archer is holding does occur on the main panel. So if you look close enough, you'll see the bow and arrow, and then you start to sort of look, where is the archer then? In this case, you have to flip it over. So there is some variation in how visible it is and how quickly you find him. That was just in case we wouldn't be able to see him. But they also seem to be using other things, not just the panel topography. So in this case, if you see on the left, we again have what is probably a wild ass. There's an inscription here that's saying, by this guy is the she-ass, referring to it. And you've got these slight sort of divisions in the rock as well. But there is also an archer there, and on this one you hardly see him. So I've traced him over here. I hope it's visible now. In this case, it's the technique that makes him hidden from you. So the fact that he is incised means that he doesn't appear to us right away. And in this sense, it seems to be, it's not just sort of the angle that you're viewing the rock from, but it's also the distance you're standing at. So if you're standing from afar, you see something very different than when you come up close and you realize, actually, this is a hunting scene. This isn't just a wild ass that I'm looking at. And this is one of the ones that is sort of more ambiguous. And I wanted to show it just because it seems to be doing something similar. We've got, again, wild ass who's being referred to in the inscription. And then we've got this archer here who there seems to be a little bit of a dip in the boulder here. And again, like the bow and arrow kind of curves over it. But there's also this thing going on with the technique, with it's incised. Your attention isn't drawn to it right away. You don't realize right away that it is there. I think looking at these different examples, to me, they suggest that there's something really interesting going on, some kind of interesting interplay between the rock art content and the surface that is being used. And because of this, these scenes acquire some kind of extra dimension. So they get a sort of narrative with this hidden hunter who's ready to ambush the prey. That's kind of the sense that you get from this. And I just wanted to talk very briefly about two final things that I've been thinking about and working on. So this idea that what is going on, like this interaction that is happening here, seems to be highlighted during two stages. So you first have the production stage, obviously, and I think what we're seeing is it seems to suggest that these people are picking out the boulders specifically for the creation of these images, that they are chosen for their physical properties. And I think it's at this point that the rock really becomes more than just a passive backdrop. It enhances the image, it's part of the image now. And then, of course, we have the consumption stage, where we then, as a viewer, as an audience, look at the rock art. I think this is a really nice example where if you look from far away, you think, okay, this is a herd of ibex I'm looking at. And then it's not until you change your position that you realize, no, actually, there's something more going on. And this hunting scene then sort of unfolds before you. If that's working there. So in this way, there becomes a narrative for the person watching it as well. And there's the sense of a narrative and a sense of some kind of micro-landscape, maybe, where the hunter is using the natural elements to his or her advantage. And you kind of see that in the rock art again. And I definitely would argue that this is intentional and perhaps also meant to be seen, because we see in these inscriptions that they write curses towards other people, and they seem to be aware that other people will come along and see what they've done and interact with it either positively or negatively. So I definitely think there's something intentional going on here, with in mind that there will be an audience for what you're creating. Oh, that was in case the video didn't work. So just to conclude my last sort of summarizing points, I think what we're seeing here is some kind of, to me, it's like this 3D narrative. You're really using the whole surface you have and creating a story because of that. And at the same time also creating a micro landscape within the rock art, using the topography of the panel. And I think there is, even though there aren't very many examples of them, I think there might be more if I start to look through them again, actually. But I do think they're part of a wider trend where sometimes it's the panel topography they use, sometimes it is the technique or the composition, different ways to highlight certain things or hide certain things. And it definitely, to me, it really shows how important it is that we need to look at the rock art really as a material and understand the canvas, the rock, as much as we do the image, because it opens up new ways to understanding it. And of course, the next step to this would be looking at it on a larger scale. So as George talked about in his introduction, looking in the context, the macro landscape study, because there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on there too, but I can't talk about that in 15 minutes, so that'll be for next time. So thank you very much.